Hello everyone, my name is Emily Startz and I'm the owner of the Woodlands Art Gallery Studios, and I have here today Mark Frary. He is the son of Michael Frary, whose work we are going to be showcasing today at my gallery. Just to give you a little information about Michael, he was born in California, got a degree in architecture, but got really into art and got a master's in painting like 2 years after he graduated with architecture. But ironically, he was in the movie business too, and he was an art director and was working on several of movies that we might recognize. He started painting and teaching painting to students in California, and word got out in Texas, and the University of Texas hired him to teach art at the University of Texas. And he stayed in Texas and had his family with him and painted until his death in 2005. So again, this is Mark Frary. We're going to be walking around the gallery highlighting special pieces, and I particularly want Mark to talk about his memories of these pieces so that we can get a better feel for the art and his dad. So we're going to start with this still life. Mark, could you talk about that for us?
This obviously was painted 1959, possibly a little bit later, but it would have been just a couple of years after he joined the art faculty at the University of Texas. And that was Everett Spruce, Lauren Mosley, Kelly Faring, Ralph White, Bill Francis. This is an oil, which possibly one of the last oils that he did, because he switched over to acrylics a little bit later. I'll talk about that later. One thing I want to say, Emily saw this after looking at this painting for a couple of weeks. I have had this, my father gave it to me something like 40 years ago. There are no shadows. There are no shadows on anything except for this line.
And
I never noticed that. I do remember both of these pieces in our house. And my father was quite capable of doing shadows, and we'll see some of that later. But now I'm wondering about that, if that's a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing about still lifes at that point. I don't know.
Well, I thought it was very interesting because being a emerging artist myself, one of the first things you learn about doing a still life is where's the light coming from, what's reflected light, what, the shadows. Exactly. And all that. And with someone who was so experienced and teaching art, he's going, I'm going to do a still life.
Well, that also goes along with the way my father put things into a 2D sort of a format, architectural, these, the things like this, all of these, the planes of color. That's what he was doing at that time.
Well, I want to also mention that this is a linen or some kind of fabric that's been attached to the painting, so it's not 100% oil.
And scratched in.
Yes.
Don't have my cheaters with me, but someplace in here it says Frary Still Life 1959.
Exactly. Anyway, I just think,
he was going like this.
Yeah. Well, to me, this is the epitome of mid-century art, because it's architectural, it's stark, and it has a I'm not
possibly tongue-in-cheek bit
Yes, that's what I think.
with no
Yeah.
shadows,
Yeah.
except for one.
Yeah, and then if you look at this orange, how detailed it is. Anyway, I'm been fascinated with this piece ever since I got to have it here in the gallery.
Okay, this one, title is Watch Out, sometime in the 70s, I think, 60s or 70s. My parents owned a Cal 27, a relatively mid-sized sailboat that they kept on Lake Travis, and went out every weekend almost and sailed around. He had, at that time or after that, he started doing a lot of paintings that had sailboats in them.
Mm-hmm.
He liked the water and the sailboats. This one, obviously, he's still keeping this architectural type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but he's got some texture in here now,
Mm-hmm.
where he must have had a trowel,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and just done this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. The texture's different here, here, and here.
Yes.
So this is the sky, and this is for the rocks, and this is the water, and yeah. So every image has a different texture.
Yes, yes. One of the things I really like about these paintings are the architectural forms that are made by a technique called decalcolation. Decalcolation, no, say that 3 times fast. It's, you put down something, put an oil base wash on it, put some paper on it, peel it off, and it gives these sort of
Oh.
landscape pieces.
Oh.
Same thing on the last one. I think my father discovered that or found it when he was in France,
Mm-hmm.
when Max Ernst was there. My father had a couple of pieces of Max Ernst. Max Ernst is really well known for this sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
You do that, and then he would cut back in to make these sort of landscape bits.
Mhm.
Otherwise, the whole thing's this sort of stuff.
I see.
This one is probably my favorite. It's much more evident the technique that made these things, and then he cut things in. I might add, he has shadows in there, so he knew how to
That's
do
right.
shadows.
That's right. Yeah.
Not much sky, but the magic back here, the caravan or whatever it is, and this one's called Anubis Waiting.
Hmm.
That's Anubis, the god of the dead, I believe. May be wrong on that. Again, late 60s, mid 60s, late 60s, a bit of magic and this sort of thing. Sometime around there, a little bit later, my father was recruited by the U.S. government to go to Saudi Arabia to paint some stuff. He was already into this sort of Egyptian characters, religion, that sort of thing.
Mysticism. Something.
This one's called The Treasures of the Despoblado. Despoblado. Treasures of the Ghost Town. This one, my father had a problem, or my father didn't have a problem. We have a problem sometimes dating some of his paintings because he would start something and then put it away and work on it later, sometimes years later.
Mm-hmm.
He told me at one point, it's easy to start a painting. The hard part is knowing when to stop doing it. And this one, he's got oil, which after about 65 or something like that, he just stopped using oil because he started using acrylic, which had more textural sort of a thing. You can't, it's hard to do that with oil, but with acrylic, you can basically do all kinds of stuff, scratch on it, things like that. This one, obviously, he put away and just kept working on it. I mean, this is some sort of a collage that he must have had sitting on his bench, and he decided, yeah, that looks good, you know, and glued it on there. The gold leaf up here, things like that. What can I say? It's a combination of a lot of different techniques and work. This one was done a little bit later in my father's career, called Yin and Yang, and it's very detailed. It's hard to tell, but from the camera, but the negative spaces are created or turned into positive human figures. He only did about 3 of these. I have one, my brother has one, and I believe this one is they kept, my parents kept. My father had 3 books of his watercolors published by the A&M Press in the 70s to, I think, 84. This one is in the impressions of the Rio Grande. Obviously, irrigation. I have no doubt that my father was probably driving along, saw this, and got out of his car and painted it. He was pretty well known for plein air watercolors. This painting was done when my father was in California acting as an assistant art director, that sort of thing, called The Back Road. This is 40s. Again, he would have been on site someplace and painted what he saw on the back canyon here or whatever. He's developing, even at this fairly early stage, he's starting to develop the stereotypical Michael Frary technique, the way he was doing things. This one's still very architectural, if you see, and he's got these things that were very important. This is a really nice example of how he has developed his style, characteristic style, the plants, this sort of thing. I might add that the white, my father used transparent watercolor, which means it's a technique. It means this is the white of the paper. So he had no white paint. All of the bright pieces, that's the paper that the color of the paper that he cut around. This one's not in the book, but I'm virtually positive it was part of the paintings that he did for impressions of the Panhandle. Again, I have no doubt he was driving by here, saw some storage yard, stopped, got out, and painted this. My father had his kit that he used, a plastic egg crate with paint in it, a squeeze bottle for water, and he would take a couple of pieces of, he always used Archer 300-pound watercolor paper. So he'd take that out, throw it on the ground, sit down, sketch out some of this stuff, and start painting it. He very rarely painted from photographs. If he ever did, it was, again, to go back and work on something he'd already done in place. This is a really early Frary watercolor. Again, he's already starting to use a transparent technique, which is harder than just having watercolor as paint and you add some white in there or something like that. You have to think about, okay, this is going to be light, so I need to keep all the paint away from that so the paper, the color of the paper comes through. This one is done in France. He spent a little bit of time in France, not much. This one in Corpus, he was, actually he was a flight trainer because they discovered that if he got over 6,000 or 7,000 feet, his ears started to bleed. So he was resigned to being a flight instructor in Corpus Christi. And even at that time, there were, in the very early 40s, there were already oil bits and these sort of things. Again, the early stuff, you can see he's starting to do this stuff.
I enjoy it. It's just the freedom, the quick, it's very spontaneous. Like, this is all very structured, and then he has a little humor.
Yep. This one, the Guadalupe Mission, Juarez, Mexico, in the 80s, mid-80s. This one's in one of the books, Impressions of the Texas Panhandle. You can see the obvious architectural bits that go into this, and again, the transparent watercolor bits. And I would have to say there's obvious evidence of being able to handle shadows, which is so telling about the first one that we've been talking about. Obviously a self-portrait my father did. I'm not sure when he did it, but in this one, he's someplace in his early 40s, 45, something like that. So he would have been living in Austin. He would have been in at the UT art department. He just can't get away from this architectural type stuff. What can I say? If you knew my father, you'd recognize this.
I want to thank you for joining us. I'm again Emily Startz of the Woodlands Art Gallery and Studios, and I want to thank Mark for allowing me to show his father's work. If you're interested in finding out more about these pieces, there'll be some information following this presentation.